We've been in Australia not even a week yet, and already have traveled 1,000 miles. Once again, we sorted out a relocation vehicle, a Toyota Land Cruiser, bound for Melbourne, 1,400 miles to the southeast. We'd spend Christmas Eve at Ayers Rock. Not the typical setting for us, 100 degrees in a desert, but we were together. We arrived late in the afternoon, and like most visitors, were absolutely amazed. Ayers Rock is located in the Kata National Park. It's known to the Aboriginal people as Mount Uluru. After spending the night camped in a roadside rest area, Christmas morning came clear and beautiful to the desert. With the morning breeze blowing, we enjoyed a last look at Ayers Rock, far in the distance. After exchanging presents and having breakfast, we started back on the road. We were burning daylight. I always wanted to say that. Before hitting the highway south, we passed through the tiny station of Mount Ebenezer, which made us laugh and think of Dickens' A Christmas Carol. It was both ironic and funny on this particular day. The outback was full of surprises we found. While stopped at a rest area, we observed these cockatoos looking for a drink from the water tank. Being thirsty ourselves, we found it hard not to let a little out for them to enjoy as well. And this would be only a start of the wildlife we'd see. We drove on some 400 miles before stopping that evening in Coober Pedy, where we planned to stay the night. The region around it being rich in opals, the landscapes dotted with mounds of excavated earth. Mining operations seemed to be a hit-or-miss affair. As the day came to an end, Siobhan was busy making Christmas dinner. Since the kitchen was hardly big enough for one, I got the heave-ho and decided to take in the sunset. It was stunning, and I reflected on our good fortune. When Siobhan called me for dinner, I was surprised to see the spread she'd laid out. Before we'd left Alice, while I was picking up the vehicle, she'd done the shopping. The Santas, Siobhan said she'd found in Bali. This was a most memorable Christmas. We would have liked to have knocked around Coober Pedy for at least another day, but had to get going. This relocation cost us $25 Australian per day, plus gas. We were told that if we got the vehicle in by 3 p.m. on the last day, we'd be reimbursed $150 for fuel. As our budget was quickly shrinking, we couldn't pass on the opportunity. In the end, driving over 1,700 miles from Alice to Melbourne had cost us a total of $75 Australian. Not being able to travel at a leisurely pace was a difficult trade-off, and we weren't pleased about it. But we had to stretch our money until we found work. Southeastern Australia held the promise of jobs. We got back on the road and finally stopped for the night on the roadside past Port Augusta after making the southern coast. We'd crossed Australia top to bottom. The landscape now of grain fields, was a nice change, but not half as interesting as the outback. We would continue on for another day and a half, passing through small towns, and eventually reaching Melbourne. In the past 8 days since arriving in Australia, we'd driven over 4,000 kilometers. It was a brilliant way to see the country, though much too swiftly. In Melbourne, we were to look up a wonderful friend, Sharon, who we'd met in India. We also met her roommates Lynn and Gary. Melbourne, we found, was quite similar to San Francisco, its many immigrants contributing to its character and charm. While our friends worked, Siobhan and I did the tourist thing and made the rounds. The goal, or jail, was worth a look. Besides having an extensive collection of prisoner death masks, which was actually interesting, it was famous as the last stop for the Australian folk hero, Ned Kelly. The botanical gardens were good to walk through, though on the day we were there, its quiet was shattered when this possum made his way into a tree full of cockatoos. He was on a mission. He did his best to ignore them, but finally succumbed and retreated after getting a bite to eat. After a few more days in Melbourne, we went south to visit other friends, Rod and Carrie, who live out in the country. One evening we went for a swim at the local beach, where we came across this koala in a tree above the parking lot. The first we'd seen in Australia. It was quite magical again seeing animals in the wild that we'd only seen in captivity before. So of course we stood and gawked for a while. Back at Rod and Carrie's, there were other, more ravenous animals to deal with. The emu farm down the road was something different to see. These were being raised for the oil in their feathers, or perhaps it was as the meat of the future. I wanted to stick my fingers through the fence to give them a scratch, but figured that'd be a stupid thing to do. They looked like they could inflict a bit of damage. Those I fear. For a day trip, Rod and Carrie took us to Wilson's Promontory National Park, the most southern point on Australia proper. With many beautiful trails and beaches, it's a popular spot with both campers and hikers. It was nice to be near the sea again. I didn't realize I'd been missing it. We made our way over a hill toward a strip of sand called Squeaky Beach. A beautiful spot, not easily accessed, or so we thought. When we eventually got onto the sand, we realized how it got its name. I'd say we looked a bit silly, but weren't the first. Leaving the park, we were nicely surprised when we came across this group of kangaroos. Seeing them was also a first for us. Rod said he'd never seen so many together at one time, and that we were very lucky. We thought so too. The kangaroo are really quite graceful animals, and we were surprised to be able to get so close without spooking them. We really enjoyed visiting with our friends in and around Melbourne, but it was time to move on. From the bulletin board in a hostel, we'd found jobs. We were going to pick oranges. We hopped a train north to stay on a farm outside of Leeton. As we found Australia expensive to travel, especially in comparison to Asia, we thought we could save some money, or at least not spend any, and see a different side to things. It would prove to be an absolutely brilliant, though exhausting, few weeks. The day began for us at 6 a.m. with the call of the kookaburras. We had to eat and pack a lunch before our ride came at 6:30. Our co-worker, James, was a terrific guy, but he in the morning didn't see eye to eye. In grubby clothes, we said goodbye to Butch, the yard dog, and got a lift out to the orchard.
Here you are, Butch.
This exact routine went down every morning, like clockwork. It was a nice start to the day. Putting on the picking bag became a decision wrought with reservations. The work was slow, repetitive, monotonous, dirty, hot, boring, and didn't pay all that much. It made us appreciate how demanding farm work is and respect those who do it. We were glad to have the work. We did have a good laugh while working. Some of that may have been heat-induced delirium, as daily temperatures hovered around 100 degrees or more.
So tell us, Siobhan, after having a wasp sting you on the chin and a twig go up the nose, how's your day?
We'd end up drinking 2 or more gallons of water a day, each.
Oranges, how we love them.
With work done for the day, the late afternoon was ours, and during that time, we really got to enjoy being on the farm. Siobhan grew up in the Irish countryside and was in her element with all the animals around. Naturally, she became quite friendly with the puppy and Butch. I like the pigs. And letting the chickens and geese out.
There's the exodus.
Living close and sharing facilities, the camaraderie created amongst the workers was excellent. We came from all over. Leon was Dutch, as was Hannah. Francesca German, Emily English, Andre an Italian. Claire and her husband were also English. James, from New Zealand, you've already met. Emily and Danny were the only Australians, besides our farmers, Michael and Tony. Before leaving Leeton, Michael took us to the juice plant to see where the fruit of our labors was destined. It seemed like all aspects of the fruit harvest was a bit monotonous. After leaving the farm, we'd hoped to travel up Australia's east coast. Because distances are great and time was short before our flight, we decided to spend our last days seeing only Sydney. We hitched a ride in a tractor trailer, arriving in the city at 4 a.m. Staying in the colorful King's Cross area, people watching turned out to be quite entertaining on more than one occasion, especially at 4 a.m. Before leaving the farm, Michael had set us up with tickets to a sevens rugby tournament in Sydney. So after getting some sleep, we found our way to the stadium. After a few hours of watching a game we knew little about, we wandered into Sydney's Chinatown, stumbling upon New Year celebrations. It reminded us a bit of Trang in Thailand and the Vegetarian Festival. We spent a lot of time wandering in Sydney and on many occasions found ourselves in the city park. Through the park the paths wound, in time arriving at the Opera House. It was almost as if passers-by were compelled to stop and appreciate it. It was also the case on top of the north pylon of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. There were terrific views in every direction. Completed in 1932, it was designed after the Hell Gate Arch Bridge in New York. Naturally attracted to high vantage points, down on the deck, Siobhan took advantage of the situation. The waterfront around Sydney has many attractions. Darling Harbour had a lot to choose from, and we took in the Maritime Museum.
One of the Australian Navy's biggest, I think, destroyers.
For a change of pace, we planned to get out of the city and go to the Blue Mountains, a few hours to the west. But after traveling halfway there, the clouds still weren't lifting. In a park on the way over a cup of coffee, our guide resigned to the fact that the rain was down for the day. He suggested he refund our money and put us on a train back to the city. We could reschedule on a better day. Unfortunately for us, before leaving, the weather never really cleared, but it was nice to see kangaroos again. Back in Sydney, the rain stopped, and we took a boat tour of the harbour. The ferry went all around the bay and out to its entrance. It also went around some high-end waterfront neighborhoods. Siobhan and I were starting to get restless now. We were anxious to fly once again. It felt like we were just burning time before our departure. Besides, the big city was eating its way through our bankroll with great ease. On our last day, we found ourselves going up the Centrepoint Tower. Here we'd take in the most spectacular views of the city. Yet, it was strange. We could see so much, but felt like we saw so little. Hindered by inadequate funds, we didn't travel around as much as we'd have liked. We regretted not having seen more of Australia. That said, we didn't regret having to work. It was an experience money couldn't buy. So we left Australia for New Zealand, Christchurch to be exact. We were to stay with old friends, Nathan and Rebecca. We'd spend a week with them in and around Christchurch, and walk daily into town through Hanley Park. The place was some kind of a draw for ducks. Christchurch's Cathedral Square, in the heart of the city centre, was a focal point for many summertime events. It's also the stage for a locally well-known eccentric, simply called the Magician. He speaks to passers-by on current events and religious topics. He was worth a listen, but I really liked his car. One day Nathan and Rebecca took us south, out of the city, to the Banks Peninsula. We drove about and stopped at a beach to swim and gathered green mussels for dinner. We were leaving Nathan and Rebecca for a couple of weeks now, and we took to the road. We were going to get around the South Island by Thumb. After a few easy hitches, our first stop was Arthur's Pass, northwest of Christchurch in the Southern Alps. Though the weather was wet at this altitude, we camped a couple of days with gear we'd borrowed. Stuck in the tent, we waited out the showers. It was nice when the clouds lifted enough for the peaks to show themselves. That made our afternoon wander even more enjoyable. Eventually, we managed to get in a hike to Punchbowl Falls. The exercise was most welcome. After another damp night in the tent, we decided to continue on in hopes of finding drier weather. Hitching out of Arthur's Pass was difficult due to us getting a late start and little traffic going in our direction. The rain didn't help. We stuck it out for 4 or 5 hours, in the end hopping the last bus bound for Greymouth, on the South Island's west coast. There we found a hostel and enjoyed a hot meal and a dry bed. Staying in town the next day, we wandered about, soon finding ourselves at the harbor and its entrance to the sea. We hadn't actually planned on coming to Greymouth, and so got back on the road the following day heading south. The hitching was slow at first, but the weather was dry and the scenery a good diversion. After a string of lifts, we arrived in Hokitika in the early afternoon. Here we met Ray, the owner of the Beach House Hostel, where we'd end up staying. He was going panning for gold and asked if we wanted to come along with a few others. It turned out to be a laugh. Though the official gold rush ended decades ago, apparently enough washes down from the Southern Alps to make this a popular pastime. We all got stuck in and tried our hands at panning and running the sluice box. Ray's dog Bo seemed to enjoy having the extra company. Ray said he'd rinse out the sluice box's map when we got back. Funny enough, he always said he was too busy to do it. Ray had a bit of the old gold fever, I think. We'd relax for several days at the beach house, trading a few hours of labor for free accommodation. The slow pace of town was quite enjoyable. Bo and his friend were always about, except when the butcher across the road put out the trash. Then Ray said, "You know where Bo could be found." We continued hitching south, quickly getting our first lift with a terrific, friendly couple, Thomas and Karin, over from Germany on their honeymoon. We were very lucky. They were going to the same places as Siobhan and I.
We have been to Naxos and Paros. Small island.
Yeah. Do you like Paros?
Paros?
Yeah.
Pulling over now and again, we enjoyed the beauty of the country we were traveling through. Early in the afternoon, we arrived at Franz Joseph Glacier. The glaciers here on the South Island are unique because nowhere in the world at this latitude have they advanced so close to the sea. Receding since the early 1900s, Franz Joseph's raw power was evident everywhere. Suspended in the escaping water were stone particles, ground beneath the glacier by its immense weight. As we were going in the same direction, Thomas and Karin were kind enough to invite us to continue on with them. The South Island held many special things, not the least of which were new friends.